Hi, this is Gilad Halpern. Before you tune in to this week's episode of the Tel Aviv Review, I'd like to invite you to a live recording of the podcast in New York City on Tuesday, the 5th of February, 2019. I'll be interviewing Professor Michael Walzer, the highly acclaimed political philosopher, about his latest book, A Foreign Policy for the Left. Please join me. For more details, check out the Tel Aviv Review podcast's Facebook page or the TLV1 website.
This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, brought to you by the Israel Democracy Institute, an independent center of research and action dedicated to strengthening the foundations of Israeli democracy. I am Gilad Halpern.
And I'm Delia Ferreira.
And we are making a special appeal here. If you like us, please show it. We need your support. Please give to our show by going to our homepage, that is tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll see a big red button that says Patreon. Click on it and support us. We are counting on you. In return, every week we'll bring you episodes talking about books and research and other things that have caught our attention.
Today's show is a double interview. We'll be talking to two women who are responsible for the very simple task of keeping democracy clean, cleaning up the governing systems that desperately need it around the world. And we are honored to host the chair of Transparency International, Dr. Delia Ferreira Rubio. She's a lawyer who became the chair of Transparency International in October 2017. She has served before that on the international board from 2008 to 2014. And before that, she was the president of Transparency International's Argentinian chapter. For anybody who doesn't know, Transparency International is the world's foremost non-governmental organization documenting and researching corruption around the world. And here from Israel, we are speaking with Alona Vinograd, who is currently the director of the Center for Democratic Values and Institutions at the Israel Democracy Institute. Before coming to the IDI, she served as the director for the Movement for Freedom of Information in Israel, a topic that is, of course, intimately linked with corruption. Without information, you can't expose corruption. Whether you believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant or that democracy dies in the darkness, either way, knowledge is power. Any more platitudes, Gilad? And we're going to be looking at these connections. Dr. Rubio and Alona Vinograd, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
You've both spent your professional lives promoting information transparency as the means to fight corruption. Much of Transparency International's work focuses on access to information or the lack of it, pressure or violence against journalists, suppression of knowledge. Alona, you ran an organization that was devoted to exposing information before you came here to the Israel Democracy Institute. What is the link between information and corruption, or transparency and anti-corruption efforts?
I think that information is essential in order to stop corruption or to prevent corruption. We need informed citizens when they decide who to vote for. We know we need informed citizens in order to significantly participate, and we know informed NGOs in order to hold governments to account. But in my view, transparency is not just information. It's information, but it is also integrity as a two-faced coin. And I usually say that our work can be synthesized in a formula of the 4 I's, the 4-letter I's. More information, more integrity, less impunity, and less indifference. And if we work in this field, we can fight corruption efficiently.
Do you agree with that definition?
Yes, definitely. I would just add that I'm currently the chairperson of the Movement for Freedom of Information, so I have not left the movement. I just volunteer there now. Yes, definitely. We see it in our action. We are an organization for social change, and what such organizations do is that they try to take democratic tools and move them into action. Without that, it's the basis for our democracy. I see Israel, if I look at a local point of view now, and 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I would say that what we call the transparency revolution in Israel is something of the past 10, 12 years. And you see how it changed the way politicians practice their politics, how organizations are empowered and can be the gatekeepers of democracy in a better way. You see how it empowers journalists when they have more information to hold their investigations. So freedom of information law and the tool, the right for knowledge, it has a very concrete effect of improving and enhancing and strengthening democracy. And Israel, it's very easy to monitor, these steps, how it was before we knew something about something specific, expenses, how our money is spent, whatever field we want to look into, and how it is done after. There's still a lot to do, but it's not academic high level. It's very concrete.
To what extent does this premise stand up to scrutiny in the age of fake news? Because right now, we've seen it all over the world, that it's not that people don't know things. They know, but they don't care. What does that say about the link between transparency and informing the citizen to make more reasoned choices?
I think that's why it's good that Delia and I are part of this conversation, because there's transparency and there's the right to know, or freedom of information, and it's not exactly the same thing. In my point of view, there's a lot of responsibility also on the citizens. They need to be active and ask the questions. It's a means to get to an end. It's a tool.
I think that fake news really represent a challenge nowadays in terms of good governance or even fair elections and political participation of citizens. Because when we talked about access to information we are not saying asking for true information. We are asking for information. Nowadays, I would add also real information, true information, not fake information. But the phenomenon goes beyond just the information access, because it is manipulation of the population.
Who's manipulating the public? How?
That's the problem. We are coming, and I'm very concerned about the use of technologies in general, the tools that technology offer, and our work in transparency. Because technology is very useful, for instance, to share information. Once you ask for information, you get the information, you can put it on the web and make it usable in a format that is usable for researchers, journalists, to analyze big data and things like that. That's one thing in which technology can help a lot, even for the analysis of big data, because a human being just with papers or the computer cannot do that without technology. But technology also offers another side, which is this of distributing fake news, for instance, or putting citizens into echo chambers, only you hearing one side of the reality without connecting with the others. And we were talking here about populism yesterday, and precisely this cleavage or divide in society is one of the elements used to manipulate citizens and to become either you are with the government, you are friends, you criticize something, you are the enemy. And this gap is very difficult to bridge. And in that situation, fake news plays a very important role, because you keep on receiving the same message, because algorithms allowed those deploying and using algorithms to come to know a lot about ourselves and use that information in order to push us in one position on the other. So who is running this is those that are designing algorithms. And in the future, I am afraid what we will have is algocracy, not democracy, algocracy. And that would mean...
I think we have a neologism right here.
Concentration of power. Much more than we see at the national levels or even international levels. That would be very few people managing this. And from the transparency point of view, what I am afraid is that we are ready and we have all the tools to hold the executive, legislative, and judiciary to account. But are we ready to hold to account those deploying the algorithms and controlling the information? That's the challenge.
I mean, I agree with you on the gravity of this problem personally, but I want to go back to the question of what we do with the information we have, even before we think about how it's controlled. And I want to pile on / sharpen Gilad's question and bring it to some real, names. We have a particular prime minister who shall remain nameless, but who is being investigated for things that, some of these things came out partly due to the work of the Movement for Freedom of Information a few years ago. And we have an independent judiciary and law enforcement and a lively press. And these investigations are happening. People know the information, but it's been so politicized that it doesn't seem to touch him. Now, what is this? Is it because citizens are indifferent? Is it because we know so much now about corruption that citizens have come to expect that their leaders will just be corrupt, and as long as they do a decent job, that's just okay? I mean, all of this exposure of information, your argument is that it will help limit corruption, but maybe it simply lowers people's expectations and makes them more aware of how much corruption there is, and therefore less willing to fight it.
If I continue your string of thought, then even if what you say is true, that's not a reason not to ask for information.
No argument.
I can't go into the psyche of the Israeli people, but when the first time we asked for the expenses of the prime minister's private houses, and we had to submit a petition to court to get it, and it was a big deal, and everyone talked about it, there was the first time a discussion about, is the prime minister a private person? Is he a public person? Where is the line drawn? And it led to discussions in schools, in the legal system, and in many spheres. And what I saw from my point of view, and I was the person who submitted the petition to court, that a year after, when I asked it again, the expenses went down by over 1.5 million shekels. And in that aspect, I said, okay, I achieved my first goal. Freedom of information, the right to ask for information, and I think it's important for the listeners to understand it, it's a legal tool. You ask for something specific. It is a statement also that everything that the government holds in their hands belongs to the public and not to them. So I can ask anything. I can ask about what kind of a brand of toilet paper they use and what the expenses of the flights of any minister, not only the prime minister. So it's empowering. It's an empowerment act. And it also brings you information that is not, that's why the relevancy to fake news, I think, it has a bit of a different angle, because when you submit a Freedom of Information Act, the answer you get from the government is provided on the government's paper. No one can manipulate the data. You can then give it to journalists, and they get more information from other sources, and they can do investigative journalism and
in other words, there might be an impact
but
here.
Some governments can give you fake information too in some countries. So
yes, but not using the Freedom of Information law. We get a lot of fake information all the time, but in the years that I've been in the movement for freedom of information, I can maybe point to 2 times in the past that we got lies, that the information was manipulated, because if not, you take it to court. And that's a legal process, and you don't lie in that legal process. Our assumption of work is that the government doesn't lie when it provides information.
Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, probably here. I'm not an expert here, but I will give you another example. In some countries, in order to know, for the people to know who is behind the candidates and what conflicts of interest may appear if they are elected, you need to know who is financing the campaigns. So the law asks parties or candidates, it depends on the system, to report on the donors and the amounts, etc. And what we have in many countries is that these reports are very wonderful drawings, accountability drawings of names that are not the real donors. But you receive that as a report. And what is important of that? We, through our chapters in many countries.
Can you give us an example of some of those countries?
Yeah, I'm talking about Argentina and the actual official government, the government in office, which came to the government with the motto or the leitmotiv, the slogan of transparency. So we received the reports, and a colleague of you, investigative journalist, checked the names of the donors. And he found out that it coincides with the list of the poorest people in the country who receive public subsidies. Exactly. In the most important province in Argentina. And it was a report from the government in office nowadays. So he published that information, and we start asking whether these persons have really given money to the party, because it was unthinkable. And of course, people start saying, no, I didn't give money. Of course, I have no money. And even some candidates from the same party appear in the list, and the candidates of the party say, I haven't given any single dollar to the party.
I mean, if you're going to forge a document of donors, wouldn't you want to put rich people on it?
The judiciary starts an investigation. And some NGO creating an app where you can report, because the list is public. We have asked for many years that to be proactively published. So we have the list. The people can go to the list and check, oh, my name is here, I haven't given anything. Click the app and report that you are a fake donor, let's say. And now we are investigating who are the real donors, because the money was there. The money was spent during the campaign. So the problem was not accessing the money, but who is behind.
But it seems to me that transparency and freedom of information, all these things work only in countries where there's a rather limited level of corruption, when you expect the government to tell the truth. And if that doesn't work, you can always go to the court and expect the courts to be, the judiciary to be independent. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, that it works better when there's less corruption, and won't work as well in countries that are more corrupt.
Your question doesn't go along so well with the question you've just asked about corruption in Israel. I think what it does, and in Israel, I don't know, some say there's high levels, some say there are low levels, influences, it doesn't influence the public. I want to go back to the basics. And if you look at ways for us to strengthening democratic values and empowering citizens, then that is the most effective and powerful means. Think about it. You have a person. Just for example, the Movement for Freedom of Information yearly budget is $300,000. That's it. It's 2 people. That's it. And that little organization just submitted a Freedom of Information request that cost 20 shekels. It made an upward that changed everything, and proved that there is the protection or the ability for safeguards, such as Organization for Social Change, that for me are safeguards of the democracy, whether it's the legal system, the courts, still has power using the law. And whether you can go so far as look how it's fighting corruptions, I don't know, maybe I can give examples from other countries, but if we look at Israel, it's more complicated than that. Petition that started several years ago is now leading to very high investigation that might cost the prime minister his chair. So that's a way to fight corruption. It took a few years, but you can linkage the two. But it's not only that. We're talking about democratic values. Then for me, the mission is to let as many people know that they have a very powerful tool as small citizens against a very, very high and powerful and rich institution or power, the government. I can just submit a request. And now I know that every time the committee agrees for the prime minister to get a new, I don't know, chair or sofa, or fill in the pool in his private house.
Or a new submarine if he wants one.
Or whatever. Maybe, and I think they're thinking twice. They say, maybe someone can ask me about it, and then I'll have to explain why I'm doing it. There's still corruption. If you do it in high scale level, it can help reduce corruption. But I think the important is connecting it to really a means to strengthen democratic values.
May I add something? Corruption operates on opaque contexts, secrecy.
So corruption thrives on secrecy.
Yeah. So any tool that we can develop in order to open information is essential in the fight against corruption. It's just a tool, I agree. You have to put in place all the other measures. Suppose you have a very weak judiciary or no independent prosecutors. Okay, probably we can get the information, share the information with the people, start generating advocacy and awareness, and journalists doing investigations, but probably they are not sanctioned. That's another step that we can go. Of course, if the system, the institutional system works well, that would be wonderful. Probably if it works well, we will not have so many cases of corruption. But nevertheless, the information is useful, not only for the sake of having the corrupt people involved or holding them to account, but also for the sake of public policies, for instance. If you are a citizen worried about climate change, and in order to propose a bill or a measure, you need to know the quantity of any chemical going into the air, and the government has that information. In order for you to prepare a bill or an institute like this or any research team, they need the information. So it's not only against corruption, it's for the sake of public participation in democracy. We cannot have inclusive democracy with people not knowing what's happening.
So if we're talking about information as a tool for strengthening democracy by addressing corruption, let's go back a little bit. How is it that corruption itself harms democracy? What is the connection between corruption and the corruption of democracy? Maybe to do that, you may have to give us your understanding of the definition of corruption.
Or the definition of democracy.
Very true.
Or both, but I think...
How much time do you have?
We use a very simple definition. Corruption is the abuse of the empowered power in your own benefits. But that's sounds abstract if you want. What's democracy? Democracy is participation. Can you really participate when there is corruption? Where are the decisions taken? In the openness, with all participating? No. Democracy is equality. Are you equal in a society where there is corruption and there are companies paying for the contracts and others just participating in the competition without paying anything and wanting to participate in a fair game? Are they equal? No, they are not equal. Democracy is representativeness. So if you have a corrupt system in terms of unfair elections, for instance, or problems with money and politics, who are these representatives representing? You are the ones who pay for the campaigns. You are the ones for those they work for. So all conditions for a democracy may be affected if there is corruption. Either petty corruption, the corruption that affects a person asking for a service or a license or whatever it is, a one-to-one relation with a servant, public servant, which is not the ministry or the president of the country, but probably the citizen will be asked to pay something in order to receive what he has right to receive. That's petty corruption. But there are also cases of grand corruption, where those involved are the top-level public servants and very important business people, and the amounts of money are great, and it goes beyond the borders of the country. And this affects democracy, and this affects people's rights and freedom, which is the essential of democracy.
I just want to add a short thing, because I agree with every word that Delia said. I just wanted to say that, in my view, a person's right to know is not only targeted for democracy, for corruption. It's not only targeted to fight corruption. A community or a country that implements freedom of information the way it should, and we don't have many examples, but there are a few better examples than Israel, is the understanding that the citizens are the one, by paying their taxes, are the people who are enabling everything. The people who are in power are there in power because we chose them. They are they are accountable to us. Everything they write, every money they spent should be, when they're doing it, they should take into account that they have to explain why they did it. So it's really about democracy. Like Delia said, it's going back to the understanding that the powers is not as it's now. It's not and that's very common in Israel. I'm the Ministry of Finance in the past. We're not talking about the current one. I know best. I can explain to you why I chose to do that, or why I wrote that report, or why I spent the money that way, but it's really complicated. The people are stupid. We're the professionals. We know how to do it. It goes also against that. Mm-hmm. A result is that it also fights corruption because, it's under the sun and we can see everything, but it also goes to something very basic in democracy. Okay,
so actually my next question was going to be just about that, about the process of policy making that sometimes requires a certain degree of opaqueness. I'm thinking about, so my question is, are there any limits to the freedom of information and to transparency? I mean, in the wake of Edward Snowden's affair and WikiLeaks, people came out and said that it actually harmed the national security of certain countries. And also the Freedom of Information Act, can it not be abused by certain people? I mean, people who are opposing a certain policy promoted by the government, the elected government.
Well, for your first question, the answer is of course yes. Of course, yes. And the law itself limits times to receive information if it may harm security, if it has to do with privacy issues. The problem with the government or the municipalities, it's not only Freedom of Information Act, it's not only under the ministries, it's about municipalities and other public institutions, is when they use that exemption not to provide information in a cynical way. When we ask for, I'm trying to give a good example, national security is, of course, used most often. But when we asked for the bills behind the expenses of the prime minister, okay, we said, we get the big picture, we know how the money is spent, but we want to see the actual receipts, not the bills, but the receipts. We want to see that the receipts are real. And they said, we can't provide the receipts because of national security. That does not make sense, okay?
The prime minister's toilet paper is national security?
Apparently, and where he does his laundry. So you can say maybe another question, is it yellow? Is that a really important question to save democracy? But there are reasons not to ask for specific information. We don't want to harm anyone, of course. Are there people who are using... In my opinion, no. In my opinion, every question is legitimate because someone is asking about information that is concerned to him, and it's his information and yours and yours and yours. Well, yours not because you're not a citizen, but to ask for it. So you can ask anything. And the law is very clear, and past, rulings of the court make the limits of the discussion very clear. So.
And you mentioned Snowden and WikiLeaks, the Panama Papers and Golden Visa Scandal and Paradise Papers and Laundromat and so on and so forth. And these are examples where whistleblowers appear to help in the investigation of corruption or in denouncing corruption. And it's essential to protect whistleblowers in the fight against corruption because of the secrecy of what we are investigating. We need these persons to be brave and to be protected because they are facing retaliation or even worse destiny. Many investigative journalists in the world has been killed because they investigated and denounced corruption. But there, for instance, you can face the dilemma of having signed a confidential agreement with the office that hired you as a consultant or whatever it is. But then you realize that you are participating in a corrupt scheme or a scheme undermining essential rights of people. Because what happens if you discover that the government, whichever government it is spying your conversations without asking the permission of the judiciary in a cause and with a justification. And you see a massive scheme of getting information about you without you citizens knowing. Okay, you have a dilemma. You go with respecting the confidentiality agreement you have signed, or you risk putting out a red light and saying, this government is doing something that is against our freedoms. And if I were in that position, I would go with the information, because I think there is a higher value, which is freedom and democracy, and governments being public servants and not our bosses. They are just there for a mandate in order to administer things on our behalf, but we are the owners of that.
I want to ask something that has to do with what you said before about the relationship between corruption undermining democracy and representation and equality. Isn't there anything country-specific about the different definitions? And the example that's bothered me for a long time is that one of the cases against the Israeli prime minister involves taking about $250,000 worth of gifts in order to, he allegedly, tinker with laws that will give a tax break to the person who was giving him these gifts, Arnon Milchan. Whereas in America, of course, an organization like the NRA has given up to $22 million between 1990 and 2018, according to the Center for Responsive Politics, to lawmakers and candidates and incumbents, basically in order to ensure that they'll vote the right way regarding gun regulation. Why is one considered corruption in Israel but not necessarily considered corruption in the U.S.? And how do you deal as an organization that works with so many different countries with potentially legalized situations?
They are two different things. In the majority of countries where you have integrity rules for the public office, you have a regulation on gifts. What kind of gifts, up to what amount can you receive, and how should you make it transparent? So you have to register the gifts you receive, etc. That's one thing. Other thing is financing campaigns. And each country has a regulation about that. So, and regulations varies from one country to other. In some countries, you have limits in the amounts. In some countries, everyone can give money to the campaigns. In other countries, corporate or companies cannot, and civil citizens, So you have to analyze the law.
And then you have America.
No, of course. And you have Citizens United in America, the resolution of the court, and all the series of juridical decisions that came out of that idea.
So how do you hold the different countries to the same standard of corruption?
We have some standards that we try to applied in the countries through our chapters. So in money and politics, we think first objective is disclosure. So we want to know who is behind. Regarding corporate donations or only individual donations, we have different position in different countries, because some countries, or there is a tendency, I would say, from time to time. Okay, we will solve the problem prohibiting all corporate donations. And many countries goes in that direction, because in the region, that's the trend. But you know that that's not a standard, really, because in many countries, when you prohibit corporate donations, what you have is an incentive for opacity, because corporate donations keep on being there under the table or through fake donors, as the case I
maybe
told
Citizens
you.
United is a good thing, because it just means that it just puts a name on reality.
I think that each country has the right, of course, to regulate the things as they want. As Transparency International, we are asking for disclosure in the first place, fulfillment of the rules. If the country says up to this amount, you need, whenever you put this kind of restrictions or limits, you need to have in place the implementing bodies to analyze, enforce, and sanction whenever there is a violation of the law. So it's a combination of many things.
But Transparency International wouldn't actually criticize a law and say this encourages a practice that essentially undermines the equality and representation of democratic government.
Our chapters do, not the global one. We respect our chapters as the local, they are also autonomous in our legal infrastructure, let's say, as a movement. But the decisions on how to react to laws in countries is a decision that is taken by the chapters, who are made of citizens of that country, and we respect the sovereign of the country. But it doesn't mean that I cannot criticize that or set my opinion. But if you are talking about a law in a country, it's up to the chapter to say, this is good, this is bad. And in many countries, not only in money and politics, but in public contracting or exporting corruption or whatever it is, the chapters prepare bills sometimes and presented that proposals, or work whenever the Congress is dealing with some proposal, either by MPs or by the government. We go there to the hearings and say, this is good, this is bad, please change that because it's dangerous, and that's the way we work.
I want to ask one last question, because we are running out of time, about the nature of your relationship with the gatekeepers inside the state institutions. In Israel, it's the Attorney General and other sorts of ombudsmen, etc. Do they benefit from transparency always? Or is there some backlash in the sense that they might, be prone to getting too much pushback from the public, succumb to populism and, instead of just, taking their own professional decisions?
Well, they might not know it, but we're helping them govern better, make democracy better. I'm talking in a very local, point of view, and I'm looking at Israel. Sometimes, especially in the beginning, in the first years of the movement Freedom of Information, they would take it personally. In every office, there should be someone who is in charge of providing the information after they get a Freedom of Information request, and they would be insulted when we would ask information, like, why do you want it? Why do you ask it? We're past...
Don't you trust us?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't you trust us? We're here for you. We're doing it for you. We're citizens also. And sometimes I would go to conferences as they would really shout at me, and it was very personal. I think we're past that stage in Israel. I think in Israel there's understanding of what it enables, how it fights corruption, how it empowers journalists, Organization for Social Change. And for, I think, the genuine gatekeepers, it's better. And it sometimes helps them when they have to address, the politicians that ask them to do something and say, I can't do that because someone can ask for this information and then I have to explain. So I'm not going to go into it to begin with. So I hope they're appreciative. And I know that they are appreciative of the work. And I think that this continuing tension or challenge between Organization for Social Change and the government is a good thing. We look after them and they always have to explain their actions, and it's a good thing.
I completely agree.
Okay. Well, on this note,
I just want to say one last thing. I think that it's important to note that, or it's interesting to note that this year the Transparency International Index has Israel at a pretty high spot in terms of its ranking of corruption indices, perceptions of corruption indices, and shows improvement in Israeli enforcement on things like money laundering. So maybe this tension is actually leading to these kinds of improvements in Israeli society. Give credit where credit is due, right?
We can only hope.
Dr. Delia Ferreira Rubio, Chair of Transparency International, and Alona Vinograd from the Israel Democracy Institute, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thanks to Gizem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, and to Itai Shelem, our producer, and to the Israel Democracy Institute for supporting this series. Now a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we'd like to ask you to please consider writing a review. Launch the app, select our podcast, go to ratings and review, and write us some fan mail. You too can support us by going to our website, tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing on our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. We have almost 500 interviews. If you like us, please like us also on Facebook. We are called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast Ideas from Israel, and follow both me and Gilad on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review, and until then, goodbye.